Hello, everybody. My name is Jimmy Smith, and welcome back to the online portal. Thank you so much for signing up, and I really hope you're well, and I hope that you're finding this very useful in your quest for the WSET diploma, the level 4. So I hope you are doing very well with your studies, and you are feeling more and more confident as every day goes on. So welcome to the Approaches to Viticulture section, a part of the wine production section of the WSET Level 4 diploma. We're here looking at biodynamic viticulture. So this follows on from conventional, sustainable, and organic viticulture. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can get in touch via the website www.winewithjimmy.com or by the social media that you see at the bottom of every slide. So this is going to be a bit of a bigger presentation because biodynamic viticulture, of course, encompasses the wide universe, cosmology. So therefore, it's going to be a little bit more complex to describe this than previous ones like organic and sustainable. Okay, so biodynamic viticulture is based on the works of Rudolf Steiner and also Maria Thun, and we'll talk about both of those. It includes organic practices, and if you've watched the organic presentation, of course, you'll know that organic was born out of the guiding principles of biodynamic agriculture. But it also includes, along with organic principles, philosophy, lots of that Eastern philosophy, and cosmology. That's where it gets, for many, quite complicated and sometimes far-fetched is the explanation that is often lauded around. Okay, so let's talk about the major points that we'll be looking at this presentation. So we're going to go into a history of biodynamic agriculture and therefore viticulture, of course, talking about Rudolf Steiner, but also people like Dr. Pfeiffer and Maria Thun. We'll go into the main guiding principles behind biodynamic agriculture, overlapping with, of course, organic. And that is important to understand that they are not mutually exclusive. Biodynamic and organic are very closely linked, of course, one giving birth to the other guiding principles. We'll talk through Maria Thun as well and her biodynamic calendar. We'll then go through the main preparations and farm sprays behind biodynamics. So that's the 3 farm sprays and then the 5 compost preparations. We'll talk about things like Demeter, maybe a little bit around Biodivan as well, which are certification bodies, and then just a brief sort of summary on the advantages and disadvantage, which closely mirror organic viticulture and agriculture. So a little bit of history to begin with. We have your foundations of biodynamics really arising from industrialization. So with mass industrialization at the start of the 20th century, we have lots of machinery becoming available and lots of farming becoming much more modernized, but also massively impacting the environment. And this really started to concern many farmers across the continent, across Europe. And of course, steps were made by certain people, such as this one, Rudolf Steiner, to go back to the traditional guiding principles and add some complexing layers on top of it. He was an Austrian polymath, so he was very well scholared, very, very knowledgeable. And he was born in the middle of the 19th century, rather, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Today, that would be the part that he was born would be Slovenia. And he was the son of a railway station master. Now, he worked quite a lot on philosophy. So he went to Vienna in Austria to study in 1879 at the age of 18. He adapted and extended the works of Goethe, as you'll see up there on the slide, around feeling and perception in comparison to the objective. His first works, really sort of touching upon philosophy, was on the philosophy of freedom in 1894, and he gained his PhD in 1891 So he was only at the age of 30. And then at the age of 33, he wrote his first work, The Philosophy of Freedom. By the early 1900s, he had written many other books and excerpts, and he was tutoring, and he created the Waldorf Society. And that is actually a society that still exists today around the world, the Waldorf Schooling Society. He founded the Anthroposophical Society. Now, anthroposophy is something which is a little bit difficult to actually talk about, because a lot of the foundations of anthroposophy are a little bit worrying. A lot of it is based into some of the sentiment of the day, the rising amount of nationalism at the turn of the 20th century. And a lot of Steiner's works were actually layered upon sort of things like racism, and also the fact that he was an anti-vaxxer as well. So there are some troubling parts of the anthroposophy. We, on this presentation, are just talking about biodynamic agriculture and viticulture, not the works of the Anthroposophy Society, which was founded by Rudolf Steiner in 1913. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. So how did biodynamic agriculture and therefore viticulture come about? Well, he gave a number of lectures, 8 lectures over 10 days in 1924. And this was in Kobowitz in Silesia. He was an exceptionally busy man at this time, towards the end of his life. And he was asked to come to Silesia by Count Karl Kaiserlink, as you'll see here on the slide. So he was asked to come across by this count who managed 18 farms, and he wanted input from this famous person, Rudolf Steiner. So farming had, of course, been subject to such extensive change at that point during sort of the first steps of industrialization, with the ready availability of cheap fertilizer and other things like modernization and equipment. Count Karl Kaiserlink sent his nephew to go and get Steiner to come and teach some really guiding pillars of what it wasn't called biodynamic then, but some guiding principles about agriculture and about traditional agriculture. And Steiner eventually agreed, and he gave these lectures, and a year later he passed away. So he didn't have the time to actually fine-tune his guiding principles through these lectures. He gave the lectures. The man that did fine-tune it is a man called Dr. Pfeiffer, who continued Steiner's work after his death. And really, Dr. Pfeiffer should be given a lot of credit. He wasn't the founding father, but he certainly was the person who took it to the press and therefore the world. After about 14 years after the foundation of the biodynamic principles from those lectures, Pfeiffer took it to the world in a book called Biodynamic Farming and Gardening in 1938. So that's very important. And if you have watched the last video about organic viticulture, you'll know that this then gave really the founding pillars to organic viticulture from Lord Northbourne, and also other people such as Yves Balfour in the United Kingdom, who wrote some very early texts on organic viticulture and agriculture, rather. So that's his first part. He then escaped to the United States, fleeing the problems of Europe in 1940, and he carried on his work there. And as you can see here as well, he really is accredited for bringing biodynamics to the world. So doctors became some of the first most important considerators for biodynamics, and then women who would inevitably adopt the approach as they were in charge of the produce in most households. And the benefits of biodynamic agricultural vegetables would be that they would last longer than those that were intensively farmed. So let's just have a look at some of those main principles. So the main principles are here. So understanding the key things around organic practices but also philosophy and cosmology. It's important that the vineyard soil is seen as a part of a connected system within planet Earth, the air, and other planets. So that's bringing into play cosmology. Practitioners adapt their grape growing practices to coincide with things like the cycles of the planets and also the moon, for instance. So it really is kind of understanding the vine and the vineyard or the farm as an organism with many functional parts, connecting the parts to a wholeness. And an organism is where the word organic actually came from. Also treating the farm like you would like to be treated yourself, compassionate and kind and gentle, treating it in the appropriate way, another founding pillar of biodynamic agriculture. And it's also about sort of mimicking nature, understanding nature's intelligence, how nature works, and understanding the cosmos and how they're interlinked. Whether we believe it or not, and of course there are many skeptics out there, we are in constant influence of the cosmos, the sun, moons, and planets. There is a rhythm of nature. You've got the tidal movements, for instance. We are affected by all of these things. And of course, throughout history, worships have happened to the sun, to the moon, to the planets, because they are very powerful entities. And then the farm sprays we'll talk through in a second, and also compost preparations, which are a major part of it. So, we have Maria Thun here as well. Maria Thun is a German researcher who created a speeded up version of composting, including using things like eggshells and adding basalt, which acts as a nitrogen fixing capacity to the compost. And this is important because Rudolf Steiner did not have the time to really adapt his biodynamic principles. They were very much in his mind, first then penned in those lectures, but then he passed away only really just under a year after that. So we didn't have time to take in feedback, to understand the processes as much as he wanted to. And it's actually taken a long time with other people like Dr. Pfeiffer and people like Maria Thun, but also people like Lord Northbourne and also Eve Balfour, who created the organic first textbooks, who took some of the principles and developed organics, for instance. So it's quite interesting because we don't really know how biodynamics could have shaped out if Rudolf Steiner had survived longer. It may have been taken a different path, for instance, because, of course, many of it is rather spiritual at the moment. And there are some things to think about this as well, which are clearly detailed in Maria Thun's biodynamic calendar, which no doubt some of you have seen. For example, when the moon is ascending, the summer mood is evoked and sap is rising. Sap starts to rise through plants, of course. And therefore, this is a very good time to take cuttings for grafting. But pruning should be avoided because that's when the life force is really in the plant itself. But cuttings for grafting, very good. From this basis, Maria Thun developed the calendar, and it has all of the timings when you should be looking to do things within your garden, within your farm, and within your vineyard. Let's have a look at the sprays. Here are the sprays. So when you hear about biodynamics in terms of agriculture and therefore viticulture, you will often hear of the preparations. Often people just simplify it to what's called the biodynamic preparations. But really, we should split them into two. We should split the preparations into a first group called the farm sprays, the 3 farm sprays. And then the second group should be the compost preparation. So that's what I will look at in this presentation for you. Here you will see we have the 3 farm sprays, which I'll go through in a bit greater detail. That is cow manure in cow horn, silica that's in cow horn, and horsetail, which is then dynamized in water, mixed into water in a certain way, and then spread into the vineyard or the farm. So let's look at those. First of all, we have the real centerpiece to all of these preparations and sprays, and this is the first farm spray, BD 500, Biodynamic 500, and this is cow horn manure. So this has a certain preparation. Normally in viticulture, you will contact a biodynamic association relevant in your country, such as the Soil Association or the Biodynamic Association in the UK, to buy preparations. You can buy them ready done to then dynamize into water and to spray into your vineyard. So here, we're actually going to talk about how the preparations are created first. So cow manure is packed into cow horn, and then it is buried for 6 months during the winter. And this is because it is said in cosmology that the earth inhales during winter, and then coming spring and summer, it exhales. It breathes in winter, it breathes out during summer. So you bury it during winter, so then it absorbs all that inhalation, and then you dig it up in spring to then use on top of your vineyard as the earth is breathing out. That is thought to be the principle behind it. It stimulates the vine to find a sense of self and ID, thus gaining more terroir. It really sort of gains a more healthier soil. So it's very important. The thing around the horn, the cow horn, is that it's said to be a very powerful captor of astral energy. Now, this is where it gets a little bit far-fetched, but a very famous biodynamic ambassador called Nicolas Joly, very famous in Savinière in the Loire Valley, he mentioned that using manure that's come from cow horns buried in this way is 80% more efficient than if you are burying them in other types of things like clay pots, for example. Believe it as you, I mean, that's quite far-fetched as well, but it seems to work. It certainly creates a healthier, potentially a healthier topsoil. The second farm spray is cow horn silica. So this is BD 501. This is also buried for 6 months, but this is buried in summer. And the influences of this is that it's seen in the upper cosmic part of the plant. It allows the use of light and heat within the leaves and shoots, because silica, which is very important, it's quartz, is very good at improving things like photosynthesis and light. And it also helps take in more carbon dioxide with plants as well, if we find more of it. It also encourages more light and summer processes, which therefore protect it against fungal attacks, helps better ripening, and raises sugar in both sap and grape. And quartz silica, quartz and silica is about nearly 50% of the Earth's crust. It's present in humans, it's present in animals' sense organs like the eyes, skin, nerves, as well as the being itself as well. So here we are, a bit of a closer look at that. So quartz, silica. So as I mentioned, about 50%. And it also grows in things like horsetail, for example, grass, willow. And it's also found in sand, the very sparkly part of sand. So therefore, it's very obvious that silica has that relationship with heat and light, with heat absorption, reflection, refraction. Think of how hot beaches, so the sand of a hot beach, can feel underfoot at midday, so very, very warm, and how cool it is as soon as the sun sets. Now that's linked also to a little bit to moisture, but also to the properties such as silica, for example. Okay, without silica, with humans, our eyes would not function, and there'll be no glass, of course, for things like optics and lenses, for example. So I would not have these. So that is said to bring that kind of light and sunlight and heat energy into the soil if you are using this silica, which has been buried in cow horn. Okay, so that is BD 501. The third and final spray is BD 508, and this is horsetail. So common horsetail contains up to about 70% silica. So it's linked, therefore, to the last spray that we talked about. And it has one of, I believe it might be the highest concentration of silica in the plant kingdom in the world. Combined with sulfur, it is indeed exceptionally protective against fungal attacks. So that's why this is used as a spray in viticulture. It counteracts the excessive moon influences in the soil that encourages fungal diseases. So it actually helps protect. And it's finely sprayed onto soil or onto the plant in its application when there is oncoming wet weather. And let's have a look at that. Just to sort of put that into practice, I've done this little diagram for you. So what was explained by Steiner is that moon forces, of course, the pull, the pressure of the moon becomes excessive in wet ground. We know that the moon affects water, for instance. So therefore, water is really the medium for which lunar influences are transmitted. So excessive moon force, or maybe put another way, a lack of sun force, means that plants have insufficient energy to ripen and form seeds. In effect, the plant becomes like the soil, and the upper part of the plant becomes a haven for soil organisms such as fungal organisms. And this means, of course, problems with mildews and things like that. Horsetail reduces the soil's water capacity to absorb that excessive lunar influence. So therefore, spraying 508 horsetail will push the fungal spores back down into the earth where they belong and not into the grapes or the crop that you may have. So therefore, that's an important part in combating against fungal problems in the vineyard. Okay, great. So that's the first bit done. That is the 3 farm sprays. Now we have the 6 compost preparations. Okay, and ignore the red thing. It's not actually done very well up there. But we are looking at the 6 compost preparations, which ignore this bit down here as well. We are looking at oak, yarrow, valerian, chamomile, dandelion, and nettle. So these are preparations 502 to 507. And the composts are normally spread in autumn as the earth breathes in, and it's then generally turned into the soil. So this will be done in autumn time. So I'm currently with my compost. I've got composting that's been going for about 6 months, and by next this autumn coming, it'll be ready to be sprayed onto my my vineyard to be. The first one of these preparations then that is added to compost. So you add very small concentrations to many tons of compost. So the first one is yarrow. So yarrow flowers. Now you can purchase these already prepared, like I mentioned, and add them to your compost if you wish to practice biodynamic gardening or agriculture. The preparation, though, is quite in depth if you follow the astrological, the cosmological sort of sides of it. So I'm going to give you these descriptions because they are quite interesting. So yarrow flowers, if they're prepared properly, will be stuffed into red deer bladder. And that's because Steiner saw the red deer bladder as a replica of the cosmos with very high astrality. Now, it's a little bit beyond me, but let's stay with this for now. It's then dried in the sun and then buried over winter and then extracted, and they use that yarrow in the compost. It aids in the absorption of nutrients in the compost pile, kind of acting as the pile's lungs, the compost pile's lungs. That's because yarrow has good amounts of potassium and also selenium. the soils can often lack these, certainly selenium. And even if yarrow grows, you'll find it like in hedgerows, next to hedgerows and forests and woodlands. When you find it, it has selenium in it, although the soil itself probably won't have much at all. So it's an absolutely fascinating plant. BD503 is the well-known chamomile. And the preparation of chamomile is that it's stuffed into a cow intestine and then dried in the sun and buried over winter. It is said when it is added to a compost pile that it stabilizes the calcium and also nitrogen. So I've had to use a bit of mine because I do eat a lot of things like oysters, for instance, and I add oyster shells to my compost pile. So we have quite calcium-rich compost piles. So to stabilize that, chamomile is added to mine, which I do commonly. Like yarrow, chamomile also contains homeopathic amounts of sulfur. It's a very common incense. It's a very, very common essential oil as well. And it's said to have that sulfur amount to it as well, which means in homeopathic amounts, it's good for agriculture and viticulture. It has a strong effect on the intestines, hence why it is therefore buried in a cow's intestines. And it really does, in effect, promote a good breakdown of the proteins in the compost to the humic plant nutrients, and also avoids the kind of over breaking down to ammonia in which it would be lost. Next is what Rudolf Steiner said is it's such a good influence, it does not deserve our customary scorn. And this is the stinging nettle, which is exceptionally readily available across many parts of the world. It has our customary scorn because, of course, it stings, and many children that get stung by it go running to their parents in tears. Now, stinging nettles are often buried for a year, so they are cut and then buried for a year. And when it's added to the compost, it kind of acts like the liver of the compost, helping to break down the organic, earthly, mineral, and astral components of the compost. So it's said to break down actually functionally what's there, but also the energy that you get as well. It contains sulfur, so it has very protective qualities, and it's a very good influence, as we mentioned. Next up is BD505, which is oak bark. And this is a strange one because the production of this also is that in order to prepare it for then being added to a compost, it is stuffed inside the skull of a farm animal, any farm animal. And we actually don't know why, because Rudolf Steiner passed away before he could share this part of the information. And it's stored somewhere quite moist for the winter, and that keeps the bark moist. When oak bark is added to soil, it raises the pH of the soil over time. So this raises the alkalinity of the soil. And that is because you have about 2.5% of oak bark is calcium. So it has an ability, therefore, to raise the alkalinity. And in turn, grapes produced in soils, when they're a bit more alkaline, are more acidic. They actually are in turn more acidic. So if you look at limestone and chalk, for instance, very alkaline soils, they produce actually very exceptionally acidic grapes as a result. There's also a protective substance. There's a kind of a rich tannin component in oak bark. As we know, it's used for oak barrels for winemaking, and it can impart tannins into the wine. So therefore, it's quite good at protective. You know, there's an antioxidant characteristic of oak bark. It helps plants to stay healthy and free of disease and grow at the right rate as well. Then we have BD506, which is the well-known dandelion. Dandelion flowers are stuffed into the connective tissue of a cow's stomach, very specific, dried in the sun and buried over winter. This aids the uptake of more silica in the compost and potassium. And you also get these, and you actually see the picture here. These are the very silica-rich flower that you have with the dandelion. It's kind of a siliceous cellular tissue. Very difficult for me to say that. 507 is valerian, and the last of our compost preparations. So we've done the 3 farm sprays, and then this is the last of the 5 compost preparations. And valerian flowers are pressed into a liquid, into a juice, I suppose, and then sprayed on the compost. It acts kind of like heat, and as Nicolas Joly says, valerian brings a heat blanket into the vineyard. So adding it to a compost kind of is like the blood of the compost, and it adds that heating factor to it. And if you then spray compost that's had valerian added to it, this is said to raise the warmth in the soil. The sun warms up quicker. Sun warms up the ground quicker. And this in turn means that you could protect against spring frosts in your locality for this. So this is something that really should be used in wider amounts in very cool continental climates, for example. Okay, so we've now completed the preparations, and as always, take them with a pinch of salt. If you do have a very cosmological mind, a very astral mind, and you are very well connected with the planets, the moon and the sun, then you will find this more easy to understand. But for many of us, it has a little bit of an overtly spiritual nature to it. That's because it brings in philosophy, Eastern philosophy, in with Western medicine. And those two combine is what really makes it both scientifically powerful, that's the practical, and then also quite spiritually powerful, and that's of course the philosophy and the cosmology behind it. A point must be made that biodynamic practitioners don't always adhere to every detail. They can gain certification, I'll get to that in a second, by ticking boxes and following certain amount of processes, but you don't have to be exceptionally spiritually connected to do this process. Many do it just for the practical nature. What about spraying then in the environment of biodynamic viticulture? So like organic grape growing, biodynamic grape growers use traditional chemicals to spray against disease, such as sulfur and copper as well, but they are more limited with them. But they are still allowed to use these ground earthly type chemicals. I shouldn't say that word, but sprays. Some practice something called ashing, which is a little bit worrying. You can spread the ashes of burnt weed seeds. So that's fine. You know, if you have certain types of weeds, you can gather them up, burn them and spray them around your vineyard. And it's said to deter any more weeds from growing. I don't think I buy it so much. But another one is if you have pests problems, maybe mice or rats, for instance, you can capture them. You can burn these pests, and then you can sort of ash them up and then spread them around the vineyard. And it's said to deter any more of these pests from revisiting. And this is called pest ashing. Now, it's a little bit unnerving, that process, and I don't think I could see myself carrying that out. What certification bodies do we have? Well, we have Demeter. This is a German-based organization which provides certifications for agricultural produce, not just viticulture, but they have to follow the biodynamic principles, of course. They focus on strengthening the life within the soil and therefore produce that comes from that soil. They chose the name Demeter as a tribute to Demeter, the Greek goddess of grain and fertility. And you'll have to follow the full use of biodynamic methods for 2 years to begin your certification. You'll need to spray basically the farm sprays and then the preparations as well. So the 3 farm sprays and then the 5 compost preparations. As of March 2018, there are over 616 wineries worldwide that held the biodynamic status of Demeter. And there's about 8,200 hectares globally. But of course, there is a cost and time with becoming certified. So there's a much greater number that practice biodynamic agriculture and viticulture, and some that will practice just proportions of it. But certified, there is 8,200 hectares that we have. And some advantages and disadvantages of this process of biodynamic viticulture. So the additional costs to biodynamic grape growing are estimated to be more than organic grape growing, just a bit more than organic grape growing, but more, generally due to the additional need of labor for preparation of compost, for dynamization of farm sprays, for all of those things, you know, creating a biodiverse environment and so on. So there really is you know, a cost impaired to that as well. But there is a way of saying that, well, because you are making your vineyard stronger, just like organic viticulture, you're making your vineyard stronger, you will not need to spray as much. And the vines should be able to ward off things like disease much easier, which should reduce your cost in the long term. And the advantages and disadvantages of biodynamic grape growing are very similar to organic grape growing, with some differences, of course, but they are quite similar. So it's important for me just to mention at this point that I haven't talked so much on this section about things like cover cropping. I haven't talked about a closed farm environment, which I did do in organic. Remember that biodynamic takes all of those principles and uses them as well. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, it has a big overlap with organic, but then goes into the more philosophy side and then the cosmology side, as we've discussed. There's also been very limited research comparing organic and biodynamic grape growing. That's testing, for instance, of the quality of soil, the composition of wine that's made from grapes. So there has been very little inconclusive evidence of the advantages and disadvantages in comparison of organics. A lot of people say that biodynamic wines tend to have a bit more of a life to them and a bit more concentration, but of course that's all very subjective without actual hard facts. And I have included a bit here. Now there are two ways you can look at this. You can easily look at data out there that claims that biodynamic has no discernible effect on the soil health in comparison to an organic vineyard. Absolutely fine. The principles behind both of these are very similar in terms of soil health. So I would say that they should be quite similar. But of course, the speech behind biodynamics with the link of the cosmos believes that there should be more life and energy there. So potentially it should be more healthier. But there's a paper I've put up here, which is research done in 1998 at the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences in Washington State University, Pullman, found that preparations had a significant effect on soil health. Higher temperatures, faster maturation, higher nitrates than conventional farms in New Zealand. Now, so we can talk about the pros and cons of this. I mean, there's lots of it, but really there isn't much information out there. That's what's discussed in your syllabus for the level 4. There's not much that information out there. So that brings me to the final part of the biodynamic viticulture. I know this is about a 40-minute video, so it's one of the larger sections. It is an area that I have done quite a lot of research on, so it's quite useful for you. And as always, remember, in the WSET level 4 diploma, you are required to know the entire text they give you, but also add flair. And adding flair is the description that they give you that means reading around the subject. So that is why in my presentations, I give you more information than you'll find in your text for the level 4. I do hope you found this useful. Please do get in touch if you have any comments, questions, or concerns. You can do so via the website, www.winewithjimmy.com, or by the social media you see at the bottom of every slide. In the meantime, if you find yourself in the beautiful city of London, the capital city of the United Kingdom, come and see us, because you know I've got wine schools and wine bars, so you can come and see me for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Thank you very much.